Hey, what's already? Welcome back to News Dose, and technically, we got some terrible news for the game industry today. A potential massive delay for both Sony and Xbox has really messed up their plans, but I said technically for a reason, because when you talk to gamers, a lot of them are actually celebrating this news instead. It's almost as if the console makers and gamers are on two completely different pages. But we're going to get into all of that today and why gamers are kind of rejoicing over this delay. Now, it also sounds like the floodgates might open up for the Switch 2 in 2026, so make sure to stay tuned for all of that. But first, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go get right into things, though, starting off with High on Life 2 and a potential Switch 2 announcement. I mean, it's going to be out on Xbox, PlayStation, and PC here in just a few months on February 13th, but it was recently discovered that several retailers have a Switch 2 game keycard listed on their website. And yes, you absolutely need to take this with a grain of salt because, I mean, retail listings are a lot of times just flat out wrong. But in this specific situation, I do think there is a reason to believe a Switch 2 port could be announced within the next couple of months. I mean, first off, back during the summer, they ported the first game over to the Switch 2, and I mean, if anything else, I'd say that's a fairly good sign that the Switch 2 is absolutely on their radar, and for a very good reason. I mean, not only is the Switch 2 flying off shelves right now, but the visual art style, despite the crude humor and the M-rated tag, the art style itself is very well suited for a Nintendo console like the Switch 2. And then the other thing is that a Nintendo Direct is to be expected in early 2026. Most years, Nintendo likes to kickstart the year off with a showcase, to kind of reveal their pipeline, and High on Life 2 could be a cool announcement for them to make. I mean, the first game was incredibly popular when it first released a few years back, so this is actually a big-time launch to start 2026. Now again, I'd still say to take this rumor with a grain of salt for the time being, but if anything, it definitely seems plausible. Now, speaking of Nintendo, a Switch 2 listing for Pikmin 3 Deluxe popped up on the PEGI rating board these past few days, and unlike the previous topic, this is automatically much more credible because these rating boards are legitimately some of the biggest leakers for the game industry. I mean, more often than not, when something gets listed for one of these rating boards, there is a reason for that, and an announcement usually isn't all that far behind. The thing about Pikmin 3, though, is that a lot of people are taking this information as some kind of shocking news because why exactly are they doing this for an old Wii U game? But personally, I don't really view it that way. If I were to make a prediction, I think Nintendo is going to update or upgrade a lot of their Switch 1 games over the next couple of years, and that's going to include some of those Wii U ports. I mean, in fact, a lot of those Wii U ports were some of the most successful Switch 1 games, including Mario Kart 8 and Breath of the Wild. But regardless, I think they are going to update and upgrade a lot of these games. That way they can hold up for another generation. And that's actually a very smart thing for Nintendo to do. Now, admittedly, I would have prioritized other games over Pikmin 3, most notably the Xenoblade series, because I think they seriously need a Switch 2 upgrade, but all in all, it's likely going to be a small Switch 2 update, not nearly as significant as something like Breath of the Wild, and that's probably why we're seeing it happen before a lot of these other upgrades. Let me hear from you, though. If you were to choose one game from the Switch 1 library to get a Switch 2 upgrade, what title would it be? Oh, and Ubisoft got hacked over the holiday, which isn't exactly a great gift for them, but I will say that the hacker tried to be Santa Claus for all of the Rainbow Six Siege community, or at least early on, because apparently when they breached the Rainbow Six Siege servers, the first thing they did is that they gifted players billions of dollars worth of in-game items. So, I mean, the community at first were kind of rejoicing over this, but that quickly subsided because not only is Ubisoft rolling back those gifted items, but they also took Siege's servers down, which isn't exactly ideal, especially during this time of the year when a lot of people have time off to enjoy games just like this. So this has now become a huge frustration for the Siege community. However, this hack has also caused a lot of chaos online because rumors suddenly exploded that this hack far outreached just Siege and that the hackers had gained access to all kinds of source code dating back decades. Now, if you heard those rumors, though, Insider Gaming did report their sources told them that the hack has been blown out of proportion. They said that according to sources familiar with some of the groups who alleged such breaches, they say that the hacks were blown way out of proportion and some individuals just wanted clout from the hack that made headlines. So, I mean, I'm not going to necessarily call that a confirmation. This story is still developing, but at the same time, it's one of those situations that you might want to be a little bit cautious about who you believe online. All right, let's just go and talk about PlayStation and Xbox, though, because throughout 2025, it's become abundantly clear that they both want to launch their next-generation consoles within the next few years. I mean, they both publicly teased their next-generation plans. But that's where I think they're not quite on the same page as a lot of gamers, because in generations past, next-generation news would typically receive a lot of anticipation and a lot of excitement online. What I've noticed, though, is really quite the opposite for the PlayStation 6 and the next Xbox. Now, I will say that I think the Xbox community is a little bit more interested in next-generation news, but I think that's more so because they just want confirmation that Microsoft isn't belling on their console business, and they want to see how they're going to sell a console without exclusives. Regardless of all that, though, there are also a ton of reasons why gamers are not excited about these next generation consoles, which I'm going to get into that here in just a moment. But it now sounds like Sony and Xbox are being forced to reevaluate their next generation plans and when they're going to release them. This comes from Insider Gaming, who reported that they had learned that the ongoing price increases in RAM due to the rise in AI could delay the next generation of console releases. They said, from what we've heard, the industry as a whole is concerned about RAM availability, as they should be, and what that is going to mean for mass-producing consoles at a competitive price point. Not only for the next generation, but it could also mean that yet more price increases for current generation consoles will hit us in 2026. From what we understand, the situation has led console manufacturers to debate whether the next generation of consoles should be delayed from their intended 2027-2028 release window, with the hope that RAM manufacturers will be able to build out their infrastructure to produce more RAM, thereby allowing prices to drop. So it absolutely sounds like next generation could be pushed back into 2029 or possibly even into 2030 or beyond, which, I mean, would make this one of the longest generations of all time. However, that's where things are kind of bizarre, because while technically, yes, this is bad news for the game industry, this is not going according to their plan, but a lot of gamers aren't necessarily taking it that way. Now, the general pricing and how everything is trending, that is certainly bad news, but when it comes to next-generation consoles and them potentially being delayed, I've actually seen people online welcome a longer generation, and I think that speaks volumes about what gamers think about this generation of consoles. I mean, even beyond the outrageous pricing issues, which again, that's a huge problem, but you can also make an argument that the PS5 and the Xbox Series X hasn't even fully hit their groove yet. I mean, there's still certain developers that haven't even really released a new game for one of these consoles yet, because game development takes so long in the modern era. And then just from a visuals perspective, you look at the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, and they're still very capable machines. So I don't think gamers necessarily believe there is a dire need for a big upgrade that's going to cost them a lot of money, which could now go up even more than expected considering the AI boom and how RAM prices and things like that are increasing. So yes, technically, this is all very bad news for the game industry, but for gamers, again, at least when it comes to these delays, it doesn't seem like that they view it quite in that way. Again, I think the more immediate concern for gamers really comes to this generation and potentially another price hike in 2026, which could also impact the Switch 2, which would be incredibly, incredibly unfortunate for Nintendo, considering that's a brand new console that's not quite as established yet. So, I mean, we definitely need to see how all this plays out next year, but I'm on the side that believes a longer generation is probably a good thing, and I believe that well before all of these different price hikes. Like a lot of people, I just don't think that there's a dire need for it imminently, if anything else. Let me know what you all think about this, though. Do you think that this is disappointing news or not? Do you welcome that longer generation? Now, one last thing before we go, though, because following Jez's report from last week that the first Call of Duty will be announced for Nintendo in the nearest future, Nate the Hate responded on Family Boards where he clarified that even though Tony Hawk 3+4 released for the Switch 2 earlier in the year, that doesn't necessarily mean that every Activision studio had a dev kit in time to deliver their game in 2025, which is a problem that we have repeatedly heard about in the early part of the Switch 2 generation. However, Nate pointed out that the dev kit delivery situation has largely been resolved, which not only leans into what Jez reported, but also what I said just last week. See, this is actually fantastic news for a wave of third-party support in 2026. In other words, the floodgates are about ready to open up for the Switch 2. Again, there's a very good chance that we will get a Nintendo Direct in the early part of the year like we typically do, and I think big third-party games are going to be a large portion of their first 2026 Direct. I mean, the Switch 2 is extremely capable, as we're already seeing from games like Cyberpunk 2077 and the upcoming Resident Evil 9. And that's really just the beginning of more to come. I think the Switch 2 is going to surprise a lot of people next year in some of the ports that it will receive. And I think we're going to learn about that fairly soon. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.